In Millbrook's prestigious law office, a devoted granddaughter was about to face the ultimate betrayal. What started as a routine will reading took a shocking turn when she discovered her sister had inherited everything. Nicka Caldwell wasn't your typical heir. For 3 years, she had sacrificed everything as Eleanor's caretaker, known for unwavering family devotion. When she encountered Sophie's triumphant gloating, she had no idea she was walking into an elaborate deception. Nicka's search for answers would uncover murder, lies, and a grandmother's desperate plan to heal their fractured family through shared truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany conference table gleamed under fluorescent lights, its surface reflecting the strain etched across Nicka Caldwell's face. She sat rigid in the leather chair, her fingers worrying the edge of Eleanor's funeral program, the same program she'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting while Sophie was presumably flying first class from Los Angeles. The weight of the past 72 hours pressed against her shoulders like a physical burden. Coordinating with the funeral home, selecting flowers Eleanor would have approved of, writing the obituary that captured a lifetime in 3 paragraphs, fielding calls from distant relatives who suddenly remembered they cared. Benjamin Torres shuffled through documents at the head of the table, his usually composed demeanor showing hairline cracks of tension. In the 6 months since he'd become Eleanor's primary attorney, he'd grown fond of the sharp-witted widow who insisted on reviewing every clause herself. Now, reading her final will felt like performing surgery on his own conscience. Something essential was wrong, though he couldn't identify what. The office door burst open with theatrical precision. Sophie Caldwell swept in wearing designer sunglasses despite the overcast October afternoon, her black dress clearly purchased for the occasion. Expensive enough to suggest success, dramatic enough to ensure she remained at the center of attention. Her auburn hair caught the light as she moved, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. "Sorry, I'm late," Sophie announced, though her tone suggested anything but regret. Traffic from the airport was absolutely insane. She settled into the chair across from Nicka without removing her sunglasses, creating an invisible barrier between herself and the proceedings. Carmen Caldwell Rosenberg occupied the chair between her daughters like a reluctant referee. At 54, she carried herself with the careful poise of someone who'd learned to navigate complicated family dynamics through strategic neutrality. Her second marriage had given her the financial security to avoid these confrontations for years, but death had a way of dragging everyone back to the table. "Now that we're all here," Benjamin began, his voice carrying the formal weight attorneys adopt when delivering news that will change lives. "We can proceed with the reading of Eleanor Whitmer's last will and testament dated March 15th of this year." Nicka's stomach clenched. March 15th, 2 days after Eleanor's 80th birthday party, the celebration Nicka had organized down to the last detail, while Sophie sent a generic flower arrangement from across the country. Eleanor had seemed unusually contemplative that day, spending long moments studying her granddaughters with an expression Nicka couldn't decipher. Benjamin's voice filled the room as he read the opening formalities, but Nicka barely heard them. Her mind wandered to Eleanor's final weeks, when the cancer had stolen her grandmother's legendary energy, but somehow sharpened her wit. They'd spent hours together in Eleanor's sunroom, discussing everything from Nicka's abandoned graduate school plans to Eleanor's concerns about the family's future. Never once had Eleanor hinted at what was coming. "To my granddaughter, Sophie Marie Caldwell." Benjamin's words cut through Nicka's reverie like a blade. "To my granddaughter, Sophie Marie Caldwell, I leave the Victorian mansion at 847 Elm Street, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal effects contained therein." The blood drained from Nicka's face. The mansion, Eleanor's pride and joy, the house where Nicka had lived as caretaker for the past 3 years, tending to Eleanor's every need as her health declined. Sophie's sharp intake of breath suggested she was equally stunned, though for entirely different reasons. Furthermore, Benjamin continued, his voice growing more strained with each word, I leave to Sophie the sum of $2 million from my investment accounts, along with my jewelry collection and the contents of my safety deposit box. Sophie's hand flew to her throat, a gesture of shock that might have seemed genuine if not for the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Across the table, Nicka felt the room spinning slightly, as if the ground beneath her chair had shifted. To my granddaughter, Nicka Rose Caldwell, Benjamin's voice softened almost imperceptibly, I leave my personal journals, photograph collections, and the sum of $50,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Nicka stared at the funeral program in her hands, watching her tears blur the carefully chosen words about Eleanor's devoted family and legacy of love. 3 years of 24-hour care, of managing medications and doctor's appointments, of sacrificing her own dreams to ensure Eleanor's comfort, reduced to a box of journals and what amounted to a generous tip.
Sophie removed her sunglasses for the first time, revealing eyes bright with vindication. I can't believe it, she whispered, though her tone suggested she could believe it perfectly well. All these years, I thought... She trailed off, but her meaning hung in the air like smoke. There must be some mistake, Carmen interjected, her voice carrying the desperate edge of someone watching a disaster unfold. Mother Whitmore always said, "There's no mistake." Sophie cut her off, her voice gaining strength. Grandmother finally told the truth about who she really loved. I always knew it, even when everyone acted like Nicka was the precious one. Her gaze fixed on her sister with something approaching pity. I guess all that martyrdom didn't pay off after all. Nicka's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, the funeral program falling from her nerveless fingers. How can you say that? Her voice cracked with emotion she'd been holding back for days. I gave up everything for her, my career, my life. I haven't been on a date in 3 years because I was too busy making sure she took her pills on time. Maybe that was your choice, Sophie replied, her tone sharpening. Maybe you thought playing the perfect granddaughter would guarantee the payoff, but grandmother was smarter than that. She saw through the act. The words hit Nicka like physical blows. Every sleepless night, every canceled plan, every sacrifice she'd made reduced to manipulation and Sophie's cruel accounting. The worst part was the tiny voice in her head wondering if Sophie was right, if her devotion had been tainted by expectation all along. Benjamin cleared his throat, his discomfort palpable. Perhaps we should take a moment. No, Nicka said firmly, gathering what remained of her dignity. We're done here. She moved toward the door on unsteady legs, pausing only when Sophie's voice followed her. I'm the favorite child now, Sophie called out, her words carrying 28 years of perceived slights and imagined rejections. How does it feel to finally know the truth? Nicka didn't turn around, couldn't turn around, because if she looked at Sophie's triumphant face one more time, she might say something that could never be taken back. Instead, she walked out of Benjamin Torres's office and into the gray October afternoon, leaving behind the life she'd built around a love that apparently never existed at all. Behind her, Benjamin stared at the documents spread across his desk, a frown deepening the lines around his eyes. Something about the signatures bothered him, subtle inconsistencies in Eleanor's usually precise handwriting. But his professional obligations bound him to silence, even as his conscience whispered that the real story was far from over. Nicka's hands trembled as she turned the key in the mansion's front door, the familiar click echoing through the empty foyer like a gunshot. The Victorian's ornate hallways stretched before her, unchanged, yet somehow foreign. No longer home, but a museum of her own discarded life. Afternoon light filtered through the stained glass panels, casting fractured rainbows across hardwood floors she'd polished countless times while Eleanor drowsed in her wheelchair. She moved through the rooms like a ghost haunting her own memories. In the kitchen, Eleanor's favorite teacup still sat in the dish drainer, the delicate china with painted violets that Nicka had hand-washed every morning for 3 years. The sight of it broke something loose in her chest, a sob that came from depths she didn't know existed. The sunroom drew her like a magnet. Eleanor's chair faced the garden, where autumn chrysanthemums bloomed in careful rows Nicka had planted according to Eleanor's exacting specifications. She could almost hear Eleanor's voice,
The yellow ones need more space, dear. They'll crowd out the burgundy if you're not careful. I was always careful, Nicka whispered to the empty room. With everything. She climbed the stairs to gather her belongings, each step weighted with memory. Eleanor's bedroom door stood ajar, revealing the hospital bed that had replaced the antique four-poster in the final months. Nicka had slept on the narrow cot beside it, waking every few hours to check Eleanor's breathing, adjust her pillows, administer pain medication with the precision of a trained nurse. In her own small room, the former maid's quarters, she'd gratefully occupied when she moved in, Nicka began mechanically folding clothes into boxes. Her belongings looked pathetic spread across the bed. A few books, some practical clothes, photographs of happier times when Eleanor had seemed genuinely glad for her company. The sound of vehicles in the driveway froze her hands mid-fold. Through the window, she watched Sophie emerge from a rental car, followed by a moving truck and a woman in expensive clothes who could only be an interior designer. Sophie's laughter carried through the air as she gestured animatedly toward the mansion's facade, already planning its transformation. Nicka's phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Need you out by tonight. Contractors start Monday." The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. 3 years of her life, dismissed with the efficiency of a hotel checkout notice. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house below. Sophie's voice rang out, sharp with excitement. "The wallpaper in the dining room has to go. And that awful Victorian furniture. We'll put it all in storage. I want something modern, clean. This place has been stuck in the past too long." Each word felt like a nail in Eleanor's coffin. The dining room wallpaper, hand-selected by Eleanor from a boutique in Boston. The furniture, pieces Eleanor had lovingly restored, each with stories Nicka knew by heart. "This room gets the best light," Sophie was saying directly below. "Perfect for my yoga practice."
Eleanor's study, where the two women had spent countless afternoons, Eleanor sharing family stories while Nicka helped organize decades of financial documents. Sophie wanted to turn it into a yoga studio. Nicka pressed her ear to the floor, listening as footsteps moved through the house. Something in Sophie's voice changed when she entered the study. A hesitation, then frustration. "The floorboards are loose here," Sophie complained. "We'll need to fix that before refinishing." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Nicka's breath caught. She knew every inch of that study, had vacuumed and polished it weekly. The floorboards had never been loose before Eleanor's death. Understanding hit her like lightning. Eleanor had been alone in that study the night before she died, claiming she needed to put some papers in order. Nicka had found her there the next morning, peaceful in her wheelchair, as if she'd simply dozed off while reading. What if she hadn't been reading? What if she'd been hiding something? The realization sent Nicka's pulse racing. Eleanor's journals might hold the answer, but first, she needed to investigate that loose floorboard. Tonight, after Sophie left, she would return to discover what her grandmother had hidden in those final hours. For the first time since leaving Benjamin's office, Nicka felt something other than devastation. Purpose. Eleanor's betrayal might have shattered her world, but perhaps the old woman had left one final secret, a truth that would explain everything. Nicka's cramped apartment felt like a cave after 3 years in the mansion's spacious rooms. She sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, surrounded by Eleanor's journals. Leather-bound volumes spanning nearly 4 decades. The oldest one, dated 1987, bore the faded inscription, "For my thoughts alone," in Eleanor's careful script. The early entries painted a picture of a young widow struggling to raise her son Michael while managing a substantial inheritance. Eleanor's love for Nicka's father leapt from every page, pride in his academic achievements, worry over his romantic choices, fierce protection when he faced difficulties at work. March 12, 1999. Michael called tonight, upset about something at the firm. He wouldn't give details, but I heard fear in his voice, real fear. I've never known my son to back down from anything, but whatever's happening has him rattled. Nicka's pulse quickened. This was just months before her father's fatal car accident. She flipped ahead, searching for more references to his troubles. April 3, 1999.
Michael came by today with papers he wanted me to keep safe. Legal documents, financial records. He made me promise not to open them unless something happened to him. The way he said it, God help me, I should have pressed him for answers. The next few entries were sporadic, filled with growing anxiety. Then came the entry that made Nicka's blood freeze. April 18th, 1999. The police called. Michael's gone. They say his car went off Miller's Bridge during the storm. But the papers he left, I've read them now. My son didn't die in an accident. He was murdered for what he discovered. And I'm the only one who knows the truth. Nicka's hands shook as she turned the page. Eleanor's handwriting became erratic, emotion bleeding through her usually controlled script. I won't let his daughters grow up knowing their father was killed. Won't let them live with that darkness. The truth dies with me. I'll protect them from this burden, no matter the cost. 20 years of entries followed, documenting Eleanor's careful construction of lies. References to moving the evidence to increasingly secure locations. Coded mentions of conversations with lawyers, investigators, anyone who might threaten her carefully built fiction. Then, scattered throughout the later volumes, a different pattern emerged. Eleanor's growing awareness of the rift between her granddaughters. July 2018. Sophie called drunk again last night, crying about how I've always loved Nicka more. How can I explain that love isn't about favorites? Nicka needs care because she gives too much. Sophie needs space because she demands too much. But they only see the surface. December 2020, Nicka canceled another date to stay with me during my chemotherapy. I should insist she go, but I'm selfish. I need her strength. Meanwhile, Sophie's new movie was canceled. Another disappointment she'll blame on everyone but herself. These girls are destroying each other, competing for something that isn't a competition. The most recent entries, written in Eleanor's increasingly frail handwriting, revealed the depth of her desperation. January 2024. I'm dying, and my granddaughters barely speak to each other. 25 years of protecting them from the truth, and all I've accomplished is raising them to be strangers. Perhaps it's time they learned what really happened to their father. Perhaps the truth is the only thing that can bring them together. March 10th, 2024. The plan is set. Benjamin thinks I'm simply updating my will. But this is so much more. I'm gambling everything on the hope that shared truth will accomplish what shared love couldn't. Where Michael used to read, that's where they'll find their answers, together. Nicka's phone rang, jolting her from the revelations. Benjamin's name flashed on the screen. Nicka? I hope I'm not calling too late. There are some irregularities in your grandmother's estate planning that I need to discuss. The will we read today, I have reason to believe it may not be Eleanor's final version. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Eleanor's journal entry echoed in her mind, where Michael used to read. Nicka, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, I think there's something hidden in my father's study, something Eleanor wanted us to find.
Midnight fog clung to the mansion's windows as Nicka slipped through the back garden gate, her father's old key clutched in her trembling fingers. The Victorian loomed against storm clouds, its familiar silhouette now foreign and forbidding. Sophie's rental car was gone, probably out celebrating her windfall at some expensive restaurant. The kitchen door opened with barely a whisper. Nicka moved through the darkened hallway, muscle memory guiding her past furniture that would soon be replaced by Sophie's modern aesthetic. Her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness as she reached her father's study. The room felt different, colder somehow, as if Eleanor's presence had truly departed. Nicka knelt beside the antique desk where Sophie had complained about loose floorboards. Her fingers traced the edges of the hardwood until she found it, a section that shifted slightly under pressure. Using a letter opener from her father's desk, she pried up the board. Beneath lay a metal document box, its surface scratched from recent handling. Eleanor's final secret, hidden in the last place anyone would look. "What the hell are you doing?"
Light flooded the room. Sophie stood in the doorway, still dressed in her black funeral attire, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. Breaking and entering, apparently. Sophie continued, pulling out her phone. Should I call the police, or do you want to explain why you're robbing your own sister? It's not robbery, Nicka said, clutching the box to her chest. Eleanor hid this for a reason. Eleanor left you journals and $50,000. That's it. Sophie stepped closer, her voice rising. You can't accept that she finally saw through your manipulative... She was protecting us. The words exploded from Nicka's chest. Dad didn't die in an accident, Sophie. He was murdered. Sophie's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the hardwood. That's insane. You're making this up because you can't handle losing for once. Read the journals. It's all there. Nicka's voice cracked. 20 years of lies to protect us from the truth. For a moment, something flickered in Sophie's eyes. Doubt? Perhaps even fear. Then her defensive walls slammed back into place. Even if that's true, this house is mine now. Everything in it is mine, including whatever's in that box. The combination lock needs 2 birth dates, yours and mine. Sophie stared at the numbered dials, her bravado wavering. Why would she? Because she wanted us to open it together. Nicka met her sister's gaze. Whatever's inside, she meant for both of us to find it. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once, marking the hour. Outside, wind rattled the windows, while inside, 2 sisters faced the possibility that everything they believed about their family and each other was built on carefully constructed lies. Sophie's hand reached toward the box, hesitating. If you're wrong about this, then we'll know for sure. But what if I'm right? Sophie's fingers hesitated over the combination lock's first dial. She whispered it her birth date, her voice barely audible, as she entered the numbers. They clicked into place with mechanical precision. Nicka took a shaky breath. March 22nd. Her birthday felt strange on her tongue, as if speaking it aloud might break whatever spell Eleanor had woven around this moment. The second set of dials turned, and the lock released with a soft click that seemed to echo through the study. Inside the metal box lay documents that would rewrite their understanding of everything. Sophie lifted out a sealed envelope marked, "For my granddaughters, the truth at last," in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Beneath it, legal papers, photographs, and what appeared to be a second will bearing a date from just weeks before Eleanor's death. My dearest Nicka and Sophie, the letter began as Nicka read aloud, her voice trembling. If you are reading this together, then my plan has worked better than I dared hope. For 25 years, I have carried the burden of your father's murder alone, believing that protecting you from this truth was the greatest gift I could give you. I was wrong. Sophie's sharp intake of breath cut through the silence. Murder. The word hung between them like a physical presence. Your father discovered that his business partner, James Morrison, had been embezzling millions from client accounts. When Michael threatened to expose him, Morrison hired someone to make the problem disappear. The brake lines on your father's car were cut. What looked like a tragic accident in a storm was cold-blooded murder. Nicka's hands shook as she continued reading. Morrison served only 3 years on a plea bargain for financial fraud. The murder was never proven, never prosecuted. He walks free today, wealthy from his stolen money, while my son, your father, lies in Millbrook Cemetery. Sophie sank into their father's old chair, her face white chalk. 3 years? He killed Dad and got 3 years? The letter continued, revealing Eleanor's elaborate deception. bribing officials to suppress evidence, creating false stories about the accident, and spending years ensuring the truth stayed buried. But the final paragraphs cut deepest of all.
I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that my lies created a different kind of damage. You've spent your lives competing for love that was never in question, fighting over affection that I gave freely to you both. Nicka, my devoted caregiver, you gave too much of yourself because you feared being abandoned as your mother abandoned you. Sophie, my wayward artist, you took too little because you feared being trapped as your sister was trapped. Nicka's vision blurred with tears. Eleanor had seen through all of it, the martyrdom, the desperate need for validation, the way both sisters had wounded themselves trying to earn something they'd already possessed. The will read in Benjamin's office was a forgery, my final manipulation to force you together. My real will, enclosed here, divides everything equally. The mansion to Nicka, who made it a home through her care, the liquid assets to Sophie, who needs freedom to pursue her dreams without fear. But more than that, I leave you both the truth about your father's courage and the hope that shared knowledge would accomplish what shared grief could not. Sophie picked up the real will with trembling fingers. The document was clear: equal inheritance, equal love, equal recognition of their different needs and strengths. No favorites, no punishment for choices made or unmade. She planned all of this, Sophie said, her voice hollow with shock. The fake will, the safe, even our fight tonight, she manipulated us into finding this together. Because she knew we'd never talk to each other otherwise, Nicka replied, understanding flooding through her. We were so busy competing, we forgot we were sisters. Outside, thunder rumbled across Millbrook, and rain began pelting the study windows. But inside, surrounded by the scattered pieces of their family's hidden history, two sisters sat in stunned silence, processing the weight of truth and the complexity of love that had driven an old woman to orchestrate her own deception from beyond the grave. The real question now was whether Eleanor's final gamble would heal the wounds she'd helped create or tear them apart completely. Dr. Isabel Navarro's brownstone stood like a fortress against the morning drizzle, its ivy-covered facade hiding decades of secrets behind elegant windows. Nicka and Sophie sat in the psychiatrist's book-lined study, the weight of Eleanor's revelations pressing between them like an uninvited guest. She knew, didn't she? Nicka's voice carried the exhaustion of a sleepless night spent processing impossible truths. Your grandmother called me the night your father died, Isabel said quietly. Not about grief counseling, about damage control. She'd already read the documents Michael left behind. She knew that James Morrison had done. Sophie leaned forward, her earlier hostility replaced by desperate need for answers. Why didn't you stop her? Why didn't anyone tell the truth? Because Eleanor was right about one thing. The truth would have destroyed you both. Isabel's voice carried decades of professional authority. You were 12 and 8 years old. Your mother was barely functional with grief. The media attention alone would have been devastating. But knowing your father was murdered, that someone wanted him dead enough to plan it? The words hung in the air like smoke. Nicka thought of her 12-year-old self, already trying to hold everyone together after her father's death. How would that frightened child have processed the knowledge that someone had killed the person she loved most? Morrison served 3 years, Sophie said, her voice hollow. 3 years for embezzling millions, and he walked away from murder completely? The evidence was circumstantial. Eleanor made sure of that. Isabel's admission carried the weight of complicity. She spent private investigators to muddy the water, convinced witnesses to change their stories. She spent a fortune ensuring Morrison could only be prosecuted for the financial crimes. And Mom? Nicka asked, though she already suspected the answer. Carmen knew. Eleanor told her everything before the funeral. Isabel's expression softened with sympathy. Your mother was drowning in grief, and Eleanor offered her a lifeline
Let me handle this. Let me protect the girls from the worst of it. Carmen was so broken, she gratefully accepted. The revelation explained so much. Their mother's sudden emotional distance, her hasty remarriage and move to Phoenix, the way she seemed to flee from her own daughters rather than face their pain. She wasn't abandoning us, Sophie whispered, understanding dawning. She was running from the truth. Eleanor became your shield, Isabel continued. She absorbed all the darkness so you could grow up believing your father died in a simple accident. She thought love meant protection, even if that protection required lies. But the lies poisoned everything, Nicka said, thinking of 20 years spent competing for affection that was never in question. We've spent our entire adult lives fighting over scraps of love because we never knew we were already whole. Isabel nodded slowly. Eleanor realized that in her final months. She watched you sacrifice your dreams to care for her, watched Sophie spiral through failed relationships and addiction, and she understood that her protection had become a prison. So she set us free by forcing us to face the truth together.
The question now, Isabel said, her therapist's instincts guiding the conversation toward healing, is what you do with that freedom. Your father died because he chose truth over safety. Eleanor spent 25 years choosing safety over truth. Which legacy will you honor? Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the study windows. For the first time in their adult lives, the sisters sat in the same room without the weight of competition between them, united instead by the shared burden of truth. The Phoenix sun beat mercilessly against the Spanish tile roof of Carmen's McMansion, its desert landscape a stark contrast to Millbrook's autumn colors. Nicka and Sophie stood on the oversized front porch, Eleanor's documents clutched in Nicka's trembling hands, while Sophie pressed the doorbell with grim determination. Carmen opened the door wearing yoga clothes and a forced smile that crumbled the moment she saw her daughters' faces. Behind her, 16-year-old Lucas appeared in the hallway, his lanky frame filling the doorway as he took in the unexpected family reunion. "Girls, what a wonderful surprise," Carmen began, but her voice carried the hollow ring of someone buying time. "I wasn't expecting—" "We know about Dad's murder," Sophie cut through her mother's pleasantries like a blade. "We know you helped Eleanor cover it up." The color drained from Carmen's face. Lucas stepped forward, his young features creased with confusion. "What murder? What are you talking about?" Carmen's composure shattered completely. She collapsed into a leather chair as if her legs could no longer support her weight, while 25 years of carefully suppressed grief finally broke free. "I was drowning," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your father was gone, murdered by that monster Morrison, and I couldn't breathe." Eleanor offered to handle everything, to protect you from the worst of it. I was so grateful someone else could be strong when I couldn't. Lucas moved to his mother's side, his adolescent awkwardness replaced by surprising maturity. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me, Dad? Why didn't you tell any of us?" "Because I was a coward. Because facing the truth meant admitting I failed you both. I let Eleanor take over because it was easier than being your mother when being your mother meant carrying that darkness." Nicka knelt beside Carmen's chair, her own anger dissolving into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. "You were traumatized. Dad's death would have broken anyone."
"But instead of healing, I ran away," Carmen continued. "I married Nathan and moved here and pretended I could start over. I let Eleanor raise you because she was stronger than me, better than me. I told myself you were better off without a mother who couldn't function." Sophie's voice carried decades of hurt. "Do you know what it was like watching you disappear? Nicka and I spent years competing for the love we thought you'd taken with you. We became strangers because we were too busy fighting over scraps of affection." "I know," Carmen whispered. Eleanor told me how much you were both hurting, but I was too selfish to come back, too afraid of your anger, too ashamed of my weakness. Lucas looked between his half-sisters and his mother, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. That's why you never talked about your first husband, why you got weird whenever I asked about my sister's dad. You weren't protecting his memory, you were protecting a secret. The revelation hung in the air like desert heat. For the first time, the fractured family faced each other without the barriers of lies and assumed motivations. "I want to know everything," Lucas said with the directness only teenagers possess, "about my sister's father, about why our family is broken, about why everyone's been lying to everyone else my whole life." Carmen looked at her son, this boy who'd grown up in privilege but somehow understood that wealth couldn't fill the spaces left by family secrets. "Your sister's father was a good man who died because he chose truth over safety. And your mother was a broken woman who chose running over healing. But we're here now," Nicka said quietly. "All of us, together, facing the truth Eleanor wanted us to find." Sophie wiped tears from her cheeks, her usual dramatic flair replaced by raw honesty. "I spent so many years hating you for leaving, hating Nicka for staying, hating Eleanor for loving everyone but me. But the real enemy was the lie we all lived with." Carmen reached for her daughter's hands, her grip desperate but warm. "Can you forgive me? Not today, maybe not ever completely, but someday?" Lucas answered before his sisters could speak. "We're family. Messed up, broken, completely dysfunctional family, but family." Eleanor's letter said something about choosing which legacy to honor. Maybe we choose the one where we stop running from each other. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Inside, 3 generations of Caldwells sat in the wreckage of 25 years of secrets, finally ready to begin the hard work of becoming a family again. Benjamin Torres sat in his empty law office at 11 p.m., the fake will spread across his desk like evidence of a crime he'd unknowingly committed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across documents that represented the most complex ethical dilemma of his 12-year career. His phone buzzed with another text from Nicka. "We found everything. Eleanor's real will, the truth about Dad's murder, all of it. Can we meet tomorrow?"
He'd been staring at those words for an hour, wrestling with implications that stretched far beyond legal technicalities. Eleanor Whitmore had made him an unwitting accomplice in an elaborate deception, using his professional reputation to execute a plan that violated every principle of estate law he'd sworn to uphold. The office door chimed as his mentor, Judge Patricia Reeves, entered carrying 2 cups of coffee from the all-night diner down the street. At 72, she'd seen every possible legal complication and maintained her position as the county's most respected jurist through unwavering ethical standards. "You sounded like you were drowning when you called," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Talk to me, Benjamin. What has you questioning everything you believe about the law?" Benjamin spread out both wills, the fake one he'd read 3 days ago, and the real one Nicka had photographed and sent him. The differences were stark. Equal distribution versus grossly unequal, recent date versus months-old signature, subtle variations in Eleanor's handwriting that only an expert might catch. Eleanor Whitmore orchestrated the most elaborate estate fraud I've ever encountered, he said, his voice heavy with professional shame, and she used me to execute it. Judge Reeves examined both documents with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades parsing legal nuances. The fake will is remarkably sophisticated. Someone with extensive legal knowledge created this. The language is perfect, the execution technically flawless except for the signature inconsistencies. Eleanor was brilliant. She studied every aspect of estate law, asked detailed questions about probate procedures, even had me explain how wills could be contested. Benjamin's admiration for his deceased client warred with his professional horror. She played me completely. But why? What did she gain from this deception?
Benjamin explained everything Nicka had told him: the murdered father, the 25 years of lies, the sisters' fractured relationship, Eleanor's desperate final gambit to force them together through shared truth. Judge Reeves listened in silence, her expression growing more thoughtful as the story unfolded. When Benjamin finished, she leaned back in her chair with the weight of someone considering not just law, but justice. So we have two competing interests: legal integrity versus family healing, the letter of the law versus the spirit of love. "I have to report this to probate court," Benjamin said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The fake will invalidates everything. Eleanor committed fraud, and I facilitated it, even unknowingly." "Let me ask you something," Judge Reeves said, her tone carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "If you report this, what happens?" Benjamin had already considered every consequence: estate fraud investigation, possible criminal charges against Eleanor's memory, media coverage that destroys the family's privacy, and complete invalidation of her wishes, both false and true. And if you don't report it? The sisters implement Eleanor's real will quietly, honor her true intentions, and avoid the legal circus that would traumatize everyone involved. But I become complicit in covering up a crime. Judge Reeves sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, in 40 years of law practice, I've learned that sometimes the most ethical choice isn't the most legal one." Eleanor Whitmore wasn't trying to defraud anyone. She was trying to heal her family using the only tool she had left. But the precedent! "Benjamin, look at me." Her voice carried the firmness that had silenced countless attorneys over the years. Eleanor's real will represents her true intentions. Her fake will was simply the delivery mechanism. No one was harmed, both sisters received what Eleanor actually wanted them to have, and a family has a chance to heal. Benjamin felt the weight of decisions settling on his shoulders. His phone buzzed again, another message from Nicka asking about their meeting tomorrow. In the background, he could hear his own family history echoing: his parents' favoritism towards his younger brother, the way family dysfunction could poison generations if left unaddressed. "There's something else," I admitted quietly. "I've grown close to Nicka during this process. My feelings for her are affecting my judgment." Judge Reeves smiled knowingly. "Ah, now we get to the heart of it. You're not just wrestling with legal ethics. You're wrestling with personal ones. The question is whether your feelings for Nicka are clouding your judgment or clarifying it. I want to protect her from more pain. The legal investigation would put her through hell, destroy any chance of rebuilding her relationship with Sophie." "Then you have your answer," Judge Reeves said simply. "Sometimes the most ethical choice is the one that serves love rather than law. Eleanor's fake will has already served its purpose, bringing her granddaughters together. Now you can honor her real will and let the healing begin." She stood to leave, pausing at the door with one final piece of advice: file the real will as a recently discovered document. It's not technically a lie. The sisters did just find it. Let Eleanor's love triumph over her deception. Alone again in his office, Benjamin stared at both wills, understanding finally that some laws were written in legal codes while others were written in the human heart. Tomorrow, he would help Nicka and Sophie implement their grandmother's true wishes, choosing healing over procedure, love over law. 6 months had transformed everything. The Victorian mansion's kitchen buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a family learning to function again. Sophie chopping vegetables for dinner while Nicka graded papers from her graduate social work program, both moving around each other with the careful choreography of sisters rebuilding trust. The legal complexities had resolved more smoothly than anyone dared hope. Benjamin had filed Eleanor's real will as a recently discovered document, and probate court accepted it without question. The equal distribution felt natural now. Nicka keeping the mansion that had always been her sanctuary, Sophie using her inheritance to establish a small theater company in Millbrook, rather than returning to Los Angeles's endless rejections. "The parole hearing is next week," Sophie said quietly, setting down her knife. The words hung in the air like a challenge neither sister had been willing to voice for months. James Morrison, their father's killer, had applied for early release after serving 18 years of a 25-year sentence for financial fraud. The murder charges had never stuck, thanks to Eleanor's interference, but the possibility of his freedom forced them to confront the final piece of their father's legacy. Nicka looked up from her stack of papers, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light. Benjamin had proposed 2 months ago in Eleanor's garden, amid the chrysanthemums she'd planted according to her grandmother's precise specifications. We don't have to do anything. Eleanor spent 25 years making sure we'd never have to face this. But maybe that's exactly why we should, Sophie replied, her voice carrying the quiet strength she'd developed since staying in Millbrook. Dad died because he chose truth over safety. Are we going to let his killer walk free because we're too afraid to speak up? The question had haunted both sisters since learning about the parole hearing. Carmen had flown in from Phoenix the previous week, bringing Lucas for his spring break, and the family dinner conversations had circled around this decision like birds avoiding a storm. The parole board needs to understand who Dad really was, not just the victim of financial crimes, but a father, a husband, a man who died trying to do the right thing. Now, alone in Eleanor's kitchen, the sisters faced the choice their grandmother had tried to spare them from making. If we testify, it becomes public. Nicka voiced the fear that kept her awake at night. Media coverage, reporters digging into everything Eleanor worked to hide. Our family's trauma becomes entertainment. And if we don't, Morrison gets out and disappears into witness protection or whatever comfortable life his stolen money can buy, while Dad stays dead and forgotten?
The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories between them. In the months since discovering Eleanor's deception, they'd grown closer than they'd been since childhood. But this decision threatened to reveal whether their reconciliation could survive real pressure. Benjamin arrived as the sun began setting, his lawyer's suit replaced by jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He'd become part of their extended family through careful steps, Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, the gradual building of trust between people who'd learned that love could be complicated. "I've been researching Morrison's case," he said, settling at the kitchen table with a folder of documents. His parole application emphasizes his model behavior, his age, his health problems. No mention of the lives he destroyed or the justice he escaped. What would testimony actually accomplish? Nicka asked, her social worker training making her focus on practical outcomes. Would it keep him in prison? Probably, Benjamin admitted. Victim impact statements carry significant weight in parole decisions. But that's not the only consideration. Speaking publicly means owning your father's story, controlling the narrative Eleanor tried to suppress. Sophie leaned forward, her actress's instincts recognizing the drama inherent in their choice. We've spent our whole lives living in the shadow of Eleanor's protection. Maybe it's time to step into the light. Together, Nicka said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. If we do this, we do it together. United front, shared testimony, sisters who refuse to let their father's killer escape justice. The decision crystallized between them like ice forming on still water. Eleanor had protected them from this choice for 25 years, but they weren't children anymore. They were adult women who'd survived family dysfunction, personal trauma, and the shattering of everything they thought they knew about their lives. "I'll call the parole board tomorrow," Sophie said, her voice steady with resolute. "We'll request to testify at Morrison's hearing." Benjamin nodded approvingly. "I'll help you prepare statements. Make sure you know what to expect from the process." "And after?" Nicka asked. "After we tell the world what really happened to Dad?" Sophie reached across the table, grasping her sister's hand with surprising strength. "After, we live with the truth instead of hiding from it. We honor Dad's courage by being brave enough to speak for him when he can't speak for himself." Outside, Millbrook settled into evening quiet, a small town where secrets had deep roots, but where justice, delayed though it might be, still had the power to bloom. The sisters sat in Eleanor's kitchen, no longer the broken children their grandmother had tried to protect,
but women ready to reclaim their father's legacy and write their own ending to a story that had begun in violence but might yet conclude in truth. The state correctional facility's hearing room smelled of industrial disinfectant and decades of difficult decisions. Nicka and Sophie sat side by side at the witness table, their prepared statements trembling slightly in their hands as they faced the 5-member parole board. Behind them, Benjamin offered silent support, while Carmen and Lucas had driven up from Phoenix to witness this final confrontation with their family's hidden past. James Morrison sat 20 feet away, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he'd once worn while stealing millions and ordering murder. At 71, he appeared frail, his health problems evident in the way he hunched forward in his wheelchair. But Nicka could still see traces of the predator who destroyed her father, the cold calculation in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. "Ms. Caldwell," the board chairwoman addressed Nicka, "you may begin your statement." Nicka stood on unsteady legs, Eleanor's voice echoing in her memory. "Truth is a blade that cuts both ways, dear. Make sure you're strong enough to wield it." She looked directly at Morrison, refusing to let 25 years of enforced silence intimidate her now. "My name is Nicka Caldwell. James Morrison murdered my father 25 years ago." The words rang through the hearing room like a bell, clear and uncompromising. Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, but in a calculated act of greed, designed to cover up years of embezzlement. She detailed her father's discovery of Morrison's crimes, the threats that followed, the severed brake lines that sent Michael Caldwell's car plunging off Miller's Bridge during a storm. With each revelation, Morrison's facade of elderly infirmity slipped, revealing flashes of the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire on stolen money and murder. "My father was 34 years old. He had 2 young daughters who adored him, a wife who depended on him, dreams he'd never fulfill. Morrison didn't just kill one man, he shattered an entire family and then walked away to enjoy the money he'd stolen." Sophie rose as Nicka finished, her actress's training serving her well as she commanded the room's attention. "I was 8 years old when my father died. For 25 years, I believed it was a tragic accident that tore our family apart. Learning the truth, that someone murdered him for money, has been devastating. But learning that his killer served only 3 years while we served a lifetime sentence of grief and dysfunction, that's unforgivable." Her voice carried the pain of decades spent believing herself unloved, the years of addiction and failed relationships, the way Eleanor's protective lies had poisoned her ability to trust. Morrison's release would mean that greed and violence won, that a man can destroy innocent lives and face no real consequences. "My father died because he chose justice over safety. His killer cannot be allowed to choose freedom over accountability." The parole board asked probing questions about Eleanor's cover-up, about the evidence that was suppressed, about the impact Morrison's release would have on the family. The sisters answered with unflinching honesty, their united front stronger than either could have managed alone. Morrison's attorney argued for compassion, citing his client's age and health problems, his model behavior in prison, his supposed remorse. But when Morrison himself spoke, requesting parole in a voice that carried no genuine regret, only calculation, the board saw through his performance. "Parole denied," the chairwoman announced 3 hours later. "Mr. Morrison will serve his full sentence. Furthermore, this board recommends that the district attorney's office reopen the investigation into Michael Caldwell's death based on the testimony provided today." Outside the facility, media crews waited. The story had broken when court documents revealed the hearing's unusual circumstances. "Sisters exposed 25-year cover-up of father's murder," the headlines would read. "Grandmother's deception hid family's darkest secret." But the coverage, while intense, was surprisingly sympathetic. Eleanor's story emerged not as manipulation, but as a grandmother's desperate attempt to protect her family from unbearable trauma. The media painted her as a tragic figure, a woman who'd sacrificed truth for love and spent her final years trying to undo the damage her protection had caused. Back in Millbrook, the Victorian mansion buzzed with preparation for an unexpected celebration. Word of the parole board's decision had spread quickly through the small town, and neighbors who'd known Nicka Caldwell arrived with covered dishes and quiet congratulations. Carmen moved through the kitchen with purposeful energy, her decision to relocate permanently to Millbrook allowing her to finally fulfill the maternal role she'd abandoned 25 years earlier. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Crime Victims' Families was her idea, using part of Sophie's inheritance to support other families navigating the aftermath of violent crime. Lucas helped set up tables in the mansion's grand dining room, his easy comfort with his half-sisters a testament to the family's healing. Benjamin and Nicka worked side by side arranging flowers, the same chrysanthemums Eleanor had loved, now blooming in defiant beauty despite the approaching winter.
Sophie stood in the doorway between kitchen and dining room, watching her family function with the harmony Eleanor had always dreamed of achieving. The theater company she'd established was thriving, her relationship with a local teacher growing stronger each day, her sobriety holding firm through genuine fulfillment rather than white-knuckled determination. She would be proud, Benjamin said quietly, appearing beside Sophie with a tray of glasses. And insufferably smug about being right, Sophie replied, with a smile that held no bitterness. Eleanor always did love having the last word. As evening fell over Millbrook, the mansion filled with laughter and conversation, the sound of a family that had survived deception, murder, grief, and 25 years of misguided protection to finally find its way home. Eleanor's portrait smiled down from the dining room wall, no longer the keeper of dark secrets, but the architect of an impossible reconciliation. Her legacy lived not in the lies she'd told, but in the love that had motivated them, and in the courage her granddaughters had found to choose truth over safety, justice over silence, healing over hiding. The favorite child, it turned out, had always been both of them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.